Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm your host Kane, and today we shall delve deep into a topic of misery and depression of enormous proportions. Only the funnest stuff on my channel, of course. Indeed, today we shall talk about an ever-growing serious societal issue, that of Inceldom. In this video, we shall explore what an incel is, what are their cause, effect, motivation, and finally what might be done in order to tackle this issue. This video here is not about tackling specific views and ideas. I will make a separate video for that purpose. My aim here is to help you better understand who incels are and maybe even reach out to those on the path towards inceldom or already suffering from it. This video is not supporting or, for that matter, endorsing inceldom or any of its ideas. Quite the opposite, in fact. However, I wish not to build a straw man then burn it on the altar of self-righteousness. Therefore, I aim to present them as they actually are and presenting them as truthfully as I can. Indeed, for the past year or so, I have buried myself deep into this topic and lurked around their communities and occasionally engaged with them in a variety of ways. This video will mostly be about my personal experiences and insight, which is in fact subjective, I admit to that, though obviously I have done outside research and I will link the necessary documents or sources whenever it is needed. This format, I believe, is important to make a certain point, which I think you will understand by the end of this video, so please bear with me. To be clear, I find inceldom a symptom of an epidemic of mental issues that gets worse and worse each year. As with any epidemic, there is a cure, in my opinion. There are also those who seek to profit from the misery of others. In this case, the vultures that are manosphere influencers like Andrew Tate, who has since been taken out of the picture, and his acolytes and others like them. In my opinion, these people are terrible and they are feeding on misery and exacerbating it. This video is also not about them. Content creators like H-Bomber Guy, Adam Something, Knowing Better, Moonacat all made excellent videos covering that topic and exposing it for what it is, and those who want to know more, I will link them in the description. To be clear, the so-called manosphere, red pill and dating coach content is not the same as the wider incel community, though they sometimes intertwine, and incel as an insult is often heard towards one way or the other. They are distinct groups with often very different ideas about the world. With this out of the way, I will now talk to you, dear listener. Be you a curious fellow or someone who faces crippling social anxiety or has no luck with women or other people in general and may or may not be inclined towards identifying and joining the incel communities, I want you to listen and stick around. All the people online with all those poisonous and misogynistic ideologies who claim they know all the answers to your issues are liars. I do not claim to know you or have all the answers for you are the only person who can find all of them. I, however, may point towards a better direction for you. I will give you advice and show you that you are indeed more in control of your situation than you might first recognize it. I will not hide it, as you might have already guessed. I am indeed biased, and I must admit that I'm also somewhat angry. There are serious societal issues that plague men, that is a fact, and there are many unfair and systematically wrong expectations and problems that need to be addressed. However, most of the manosphere and frankly all of the incel communities are only there to justify misogynistic outbursts and blame women or society or whatever today for problems often not at all connected to them. I take this a step further and state now that I'm firm in the belief that women's rights movements and feminism in general done more to solve issues concerning men than the manosphere ever did, which I will explain in the upcoming video about the specific ideas, where I will also address and debunk some of the largest claims and ideas of inceldom. For now, get to the basics and progress further, shall we? First of all, I must point out that not all communities are the same. I will talk about the general experience that can be widely applied in my opinion. However, not all incels are the same. I'm against complete generalization and there are always exceptions even if there is a rule. So let's get through the basics first. What is an incel? Incel is short for involuntary celibate. As far as I have seen it, it originally just meant a person, mostly men, though there are incel women, often referred to as femcels, who for one reason or another that is beyond their ability to influence makes them unable to get laid or get into a meaningful relationship. It was, however, altered in meaning as a community of men has formed around the idea that they can't get laid and are very sad about it. The term incel today generally conjures up a man, usually young but not always, who is heavily antisocial, have trouble getting laid or getting into meaningful relationships, and usually harbors strong tendencies of self-hate and nihilism because he thinks he's ugly and worthless, and who hates normies and women and the world in general. Normies is a generic internet term for normal people or people outside one's own social circle. According to incels, normies live in blissful ignorance to how corrupt society is and how much incels suffer from it as a consequence. They tend to hate women because, beyond the fact that according to themselves they are born with unchangeable and uninfluenceable, unattractive characteristics, women and feminism are the reason why they can't get laid. This is because, according to incels, women, or as they tend to refer to them, females, roasties, foids, toilets, whores, and another multitude of other degrading, awful slurs and terms, often purposefully designed to dehumanize women, nowadays either have agency over their decisions and because of their nature don't choose incels, or because feminism corrupted their minds so they only go for the top 20 or 10 or 0.1% of men, whichever nonsense they say today. This upper class of men, usually referred to as Chad, are idealized to be rich, tall, and muscular, whose status in this imagined social hierarchy permits them to do anything, even abusing women with no consequence. Everyone else in the lower castes of men must either put up with the small fraction of ugly women who Chad doesn't want, or with women who financially or in other way exploit the man and pretend to be with them while cheating on them with Chad. According to incels, as things stand, it's over for them. They have no good prospects in life and they will forever be alone, no matter what they are doing. Now, we all probably know the stereotypical, unwashed, overweight, neckbeard nice guy who sits in his mom's basement and demands a perfect, sometimes preferably Asian trad wife, and has an opinion on everything about women with questionable views on the age of consent. However, incels are much more complicated than that. Many of them have lives and jobs outside of their circles, seem nice, are intelligent, and actually look good, may even be one of the many people around you, but due to certain factors, more often than not because of social inexperience or an unpalatable personality, are unsuccessful with women. Incels and manosphere influencers prey on the insecurities of ordinary men. Incels tell you that there is no hope for you, you are ugly and unsuccessful and you should join them or commit dial, while manosphere influencers like Andrew Tate and his acolytes commercialize your lack of success by selling you get laid easy courses, books and video content on what to do with women and how to get them, and then when these inevitably fail, they sell you the idea that it's not your, or for that matter their fault, but women's faults, feminism's faults, society's faults, and only by going back to an idealized but completely false past can your problems be solved. The perfect con, if you ask me. I tell you this because when I say incel, I will mean these so-called, by me, true incels, the dwellers of incel forums and other similarly dedicated incel communities, and those who create sites like Incel Wiki, not Manosphere or Red Pill or dating coach influencers. I will talk about the people who in their mostly self-induced misery turn to hatred and create a fantasy, an alternative reality where they can justify their hatred of women and everybody who is not them. They are more often than not angry with pickup artists and influencers like Tate and his cronies because they see their apparent success with women as an example on why their views on women are true, because they go for these awful but quote-unquote good-looking and rich individuals, which is one of the big ways these crowds are distinct. If you look into it deeper, it is actually quite remarkable how big and organized this incel subculture actually is. They have created their own communities and their own existence on the internet based on their own ideas. They have their own pseudoscientific theorems and even their own slang dictionary, some of which have become widely used internet slang later on. To them, everything is about sex, misery, and sexual market value, and the truth that only looks and wealth matter, upon which they are shit out of luck, and that women and soy boys and normies are responsible for their, and by extension society's, ills. The only reason for the existence of women is to be objects for their desires and should never have the ability to choose in the first place. This goes into even deeper and darker places, with rape and pedophilia considered as not only forgivable but something to be aspired for or legalized and normalized, because that is the only way for them to get laid. On this topic, as they go into ever deeper extremes, which I will explain a little bit further down the line in detail, they often say that the sexual prime of a woman is between ages of 12 and 20, and outside of that they are completely worthless. Though not all incels agree with everything that I have just said, they most certainly tolerate it within their communities. Though incel ideas are often closely intertwined with far-right reactionary ideals, like how they are often homophobic, but not always, and believe that women should not lead or vote, and that their places in the kitchen make subservient to their husbands, and perpetuate racist and eugenicist theories, I wouldn't categorize Inceldom as necessarily a far-right ideology if we talk about it ideologically. The reason for this is because what unifies them at its core is the fact that they can't get laid, according to themselves, for unchangeable reasons, and that they are very sad about it. Because of this, incels come from a very diverse background, and naturally, to preserve some level of cohesion, many such ideas are not strictly necessary or a requirement to be one of them, and more related to how the individual person feels about it. Many, if not most incels, display ideas traditionally considered to be pretty progressive, liberal or left-wing, such as universal healthcare, radical and student-centered education reform, social programs intended to help people in poverty, state-controlled housing price reduction, less work hours and workload with higher pay, etc. They are not one homogenic far-right bloc, though there are certainly those types too. Before we move on, I have to talk about another category of incels, the femcels, which is short for female incels, whose communities are shining examples of the equality of the sexes in misery and hatred. I didn't delve that particularly deep into their circles, which is not made less difficult for me by their tendency to ban everyone even just suspected to be a man or a scrot, as they tend to call us, because they also have their awful terminology, just like how incels tend to ban women, and I didn't bother too much. This, however, doesn't mean that they are non-existent or entirely trivial, only that less attention is afforded to them in general. This, in my objectively correct opinion, may boil down to three main factors. One, because in our society, which is washed through by often toxic masculine stereotypes and ideals, a woman is still kind of considered a one-sided object to be lasted after with no capability for complex personal issues, who barely have to lift a finger or put energy into the pursuit of men to get laid, and could never have a toxic, basement-dwelling, unbearable personality and or lack of personal hygiene that would drive virtually everyone away, or something along these lines. Two, the lack of more mainstream media presence, prominent influencers, and or a better organized and more coherent ideology that could push them into the public consciousness. Their communities also tend to be more closed and obscure, though it could be just an internet-wide bias. No, really, it is just as possible that their groups are simply absent from the circles where the loudest discussions take place online, for example, and because of this they evade more large-scale detection. Three is violence, more precisely the lack of it. One of the reasons why incels were launched into the public consciousness was a series of misogynistically loaded terror attacks and expanding violence towards women in the recent years. And on that last note, I would like to talk about something heavy. Since around the early 2010s, there is a rising tendency in male supremacist and Inceldom-motivated terror attacks and movements. Just to be clear, to those whom this is not obvious, I am not supporting anything here, I'm merely trying to explain and understand. This will be disturbing again, so be aware of that. In 2014, a man named Elliot Oliver Roberto Roger, using a combination of knives, firearms and a motor vehicle, killed 6 and injured 14 in a terror attack, after which he shot himself. In his manifesto, titled My Twisted World, the story of Elliot Roger, he proclaimed a war on women and blamed his problems of loneliness on them and men who were socially more successful. The manifesto itself, which is more than 100 pages long, which I will not link here and ask you, dear viewer, that if you are curious, find it online, it's not that difficult, I'm really sorry, showcases how horribly twisted and deformed was the mind of this person who became a murderer and a terrorist. I will now read the introduction. The only thing I'm in pursuit of here is the pursuit of informing and knowing, nothing else. This reading serves no other purpose. Humanity. All of my suffering on this world has been at the hands of humanity, particularly women. It has made me realize just how brutal and twisted humanity is as a species. All I ever wanted was to fit in and live a happy life among humanity, but I was cast out and rejected, forced to endure an existence of loneliness and insignificance, all because of the females of the human species were incapable of seeing the value in me. This is the story of how I, Elliot Rodger, came to be. This is the story of my entire life. It is a dark story of sadness, anger, and hatred. It is a story of a war against cruel injustice. In this magnificent story, I will disclose every single detail about my life, every single significant experience that I have pulled from my superior memory, as well as how those experiences have shaped my views of the world. This tragedy did not have to happen. I didn't want things to turn out this way, but humanity forced my hand, and this story will explain why. My life didn't start out dark and twisted. I started out as a happy and blissful child, living my life to the fullest in a world I thought was good and pure. You can see all the mentioned incel tropes, a hatred of self and of others, and most importantly placing all the blame on everybody else. The self-indulging, edgy nonsense is not what I find the most worrying about the words of a man who killed all those people, however. Stripping down to its barest of components, at the core you may find a troubled young man who had an unfortunate school life where he didn't have many people he could or wanted to rely on. He was bullied in school and showed signs of mental illness early on, and even though he eventually managed to enroll into university, he never found a way out of the ever-deepening pit of sadness, anger, and hatred and loneliness. What I find most worrying is how these experiences are often not that extraordinary and can happen to any young man, really. This makes Inceldom less of a distant group of weirdos separate from the rest of society dwelling in the dark corners of forgotten internet forums, and more of a close and relevant thing that causes tragedy and hits particularly home for a lot of people. Inceldom is a serious issue that must be tackled as soon as possible. Again, just to be clear, for what he did, Elliot is the only one to be blamed. I'm not excusing a terrorist murderer, and I am not excusing incels for their behavior either. But the point is, we cannot just ignore, wave, and laugh at this whole phenomenon. And it is only getting worse. For the heinous crimes Elliot Rodger committed, he became sort of an incel saint. Many groups openly praise him as someone who, according to them, dared to rebel against the ills of society and enact his revenge on females and Chad, and some wish to follow in his steps. On April 23rd, 2018, during a busy afternoon in the business center of Toronto at 1:22 p.m. Eastern Time, a white Chevrolet Express van veered off course from the road into a crowd of pedestrians. The driver, 25-year-old Alec Minassian, self-proclaimed incel who frequented incel groups online, was intent on killing women in what he called a continuation of the incel rebellion that was started by Elliot. He unfortunately succeeded. 10 people died that day, 8 women and 2 men, with an additional 17 injured. He was apprehended and later pleaded not guilty. He was found to be responsible for all charges and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole only after 25 years. Again, I am saying all this to hammer home the point that incels are not simply an obscure online hate group, and their ideology is not simply harmless lunacy. People all too often tend to ignore the problems caused by pseudoscience and conspiracy theories, then act shocked when someone causes death and suffering, or actually even may win a presidential election. We often delude ourselves to think that anybody who believes things like this is inherently a madman or an idiot. This is, in my opinion, a coping mechanism and completely incorrect. You're probably saying right now that a logical person, like us, you and me, could never be fooled by such nonsense, right? The problem is, people rarely think themselves to be illogical. People work with the information they have at hand. A logical and intelligent person who has only limited information to work with can arrive at a conclusion that to them and anyone who also have a similar subset of information to work with may seem logical. Desperation is also a factor in that. After all, what can make a human a highly social animal desperate if not loneliness? Be it Inceldom, Nazism, communism, religious fanaticism, or whatever comes up, such things are part of the human experience, and once in, getting out is extremely difficult. The lack of teaching people both scientific and online literacy, and the absence of communication and social education in base school in a system that is outdated by hundreds of years provides inadequate psychological support to troubled teens are important factors in how these men get into online echo chambers where they are indoctrinated and constantly reinforced in their beliefs. So, what is the average experience of a young man who gets sucked into a community like this? In short, it is terrible. I would say, and I think this is not really controversial, that most men that end up there don't necessarily start out as raging misogynists ready to commit acts of violence against themselves and others, obviously. It all starts with a feeling of isolation. As the internet made us able to connect with nearly everyone instantly, in our society unexpected problems have reared their head. Loneliness, depression, and the feeling of being lost. It would be lazy and incorrect to say that the internet is solely responsible for this. This is a very complex topic. I'm not blaming the internet or the video games or the concept of meeting with people and socializing online. Far from it. These things are completely normal and often the last and only refuge for people who are not feeling well. Most are in fact having a normal online presence with their peers, and it can be healthy, forging friendships and relationships that are just as long-lasting as the ones forged with people you met personally. So, no, the point is not that young people use the internet and this makes them violent and aggressive. You could take other examples, like how a young person today has troubled prospects in life, even in developed countries. In the past decade alone, we have faced at least 3 economic crashes, 2 pandemics, and even more major wars, as the political system and by extension entire societies grew ever more divided. We are, in fact, richer, safer, and more peaceful than ever probably in human history, yet the benefits of these barely seem to get to the new generations. They live in a school system that was last considered adequate in the mid-1950s, that absolutely does not prepare students for the turbulence of life, doesn't consider their individual needs, and forces them into mindless tasks that are proven again and again not being enough to build on the individual capabilities of students, with terrible work schedules making them tired and devoid of sleep and motivation. Bullying, a common problem at school, including from both their fellow students and their teachers, living in an authoritarian hierarchical caste system where they are told that their voice does not in fact matter, causing them to isolate themselves socially and build resentment towards others. Then comes the propaganda and the stereotypes by wider, often toxically masculine-oriented society perpetuated by manosphere influencers and problematic online culture, where wishing death of others and hating women and minorities are the norm. In this world, assigning any more worth to women than objects to be lusted after, talking to people who are not like you, or developing interests considered unmanly are heavily frowned upon and publicly ridiculed. In this environment, a distorted measure of what counts as manly develops, where you are only somebody if you have sex, act without emotion, like a complete sociopath, don't talk about your problems, and behave like someone with a superiority complex. You are also expected to ridicule others who step out of line, your social standing only increasing if you perpetuate this behavior, and lowering if you are going against it. Young men, especially those wishing to escape this situation, overstressed and overworked, become vulnerable in their social isolation that is perpetuated by the lack of their social skills, especially in relation to other groups. Nobody taught them those after all. They are lonely and spend most of their free time online, the only refuge for them. They want to have meaningful friends and relationships, I have to stress this. It's not like they are not trying. They have seen the idealized life in our culture where it is expected that you date, marry, have a home, have kids, and if you leave high school a virgin, you have lost all your chance in life. They look at the ideal man, let's call it that, and keep in mind that this is not an ideal that generally women perpetuate, but other men in their circles, and then look at themselves and they start to hate themselves for not being like that. After all, they have no experience what women want, and they are discouraged from and ridiculed for building meaningful platonic relationships with the other sex. Women might as well be aliens to them from another planet. People naturally gravitate towards communities that offer them the same viewpoints, where they can feel that they belong somewhere, where they have a shared experience. This way, they end up in forums and online chat communities which share in their interests and hobbies. They get into groups where they often meet similarly socially isolated individuals who they bond with over their shared experiences. Very often, through either connection with them or on their own, they find themselves in often male-dominated communities where sharing racist and sexist jokes is often the norm, especially by individuals with questionable social experience who barely venture out of the boundaries of their communities where such things are acceptable. It is a prime breeding ground for incels and incel behavior. The men become isolated as others not accepting of this turn away, because in their circles this is a behavior that is shunned. Their existence and personality merges with their online life. They scarcely engage in offline activities besides work and occasional trips of necessity. Many incels are in some stages of being terminally online. When you are there, you usually just share in the behavior. After all, the funnier and more daring, quote-unquote, you are, the higher you are regarded, and you rarely if ever have to face repercussions for this behavior under the shield of internet anonymity. So you might just regard it as consequenceless fun where you can blow off some steam from a stressful day. And if you have people around you whose disapproval you might have to face, you can either just shut them out or they will leave on their own, making it all the more easier for you. This in turn encourages ever more toxic behavior. You can stumble into dedicated incel groups outright this way, or get invited into them by others from the social circles who you trust. Or even the group itself you are in can turn into an incel community on its own, as members either share in this behavior or leave eventually. Besides being bombarded with incel and manosphere propaganda by online algorithms, incel propaganda gets shared in your circle, drawing in approval, slowly creeping its way into the community and into your everyday casual conversations, and eventually into the picture in your head about how the world is. Eventually, there will be members who get invited in or fall into the rabbit hole in one way or the other themselves. If it is not you in the first place, there will be people who either you know or someone you know invited, who in a casual Saturday evening conversation start to talk about how he knows everything about your struggle and understands everything about you. You are ugly, you're hopeless, and they know exactly who to blame. Mountains of bullshit are placed in front of you, explaining that the experience of misery you are in are all because of women are evil and cruel. They rationalize their hate with either cherry-picked data or outright lies. Even if you are hesitant at first, you don't know the answer. After all, they ring so true. From people you either know or sound exactly like you. At this point, you have probably already read about it and posted about it online, and thanks to the people around you and online algorithms that prioritize engagement, you get flooded by information pushing similar agendas. From the more traditional conspiracy theories and sexist views, you will eventually arrive to the so-called black pill, one of the most prominent defining philosophy of Inceldom that is, and I quote from Incel Wiki, a philosophy that argues that physical attractiveness is the most critical factor in determining man's dating success, especially in modern Western countries. A man's money, status, and social skills are argued to be other factors of secondary importance, which is known as the LMS theory. An expanded or alternate definition proposes that a man's dating and life outcomes generally rely on genetically determined traits. As a consequence of these beliefs, black pillars often argue that a man's dating issues require systematic rather than individual solutions, if there is any solution at all for the most disadvantaged males. Someone who holds a certain amount of black pill beliefs is called a black pillar or black pilled. For the record, I will now state that this whole so-called philosophy is complete and utter nonsense, and the very fact that there is no objective attraction by the definition of this word, and if you ask two people what they like in a partner, you will receive 3 different answers, debunks its entire foundation. This will hardly matter to the individuals already believing in it though. First, because this doesn't instantly change the fact that they are still lonely and miserable, and second, because now they live in a self-reinforcing collective bubble where any outside information that may threaten the group is also a threat to their personal existence, therefore it must be bullshit. I will not go into this topic any deeper for now. It is up to my next installment of this series, which originally started out as a single video. For now, let's pick up the thread where it was left off. You are welcomed into this new social circle. It is not simply an answer for one's problems, but a community to belong to. In this group, you interact with like-minded people, share your thoughts, engage in discussions and activities. There you talk of your problems, and you are reassured that the reason for them are feminism, women, and the fact that you are ugly and you can do nothing about it. You are given a simple answer to a complex problem. Here, you are not to blame. Most if not all factors are outside of your controls. Everyone and everything else is the reason why you feel bad. And here comes the already mentioned ever more spiraling hatred fueled by internet anonymity and encouragement from your peers. Even common decency becomes something that comes from blue pillars and normies, blue pillars being the word for people who are not yet enlightened by such ideas as the red pill or the black pill. After all, they are the ones telling you what you say is bad, yet they are the one to blame for your problems. Why should you listen to them? The outside world lives in a blissful lie anyway, a world that rejected you, and now you are in a world that accepts and guides you, even if it's its own twisted way. So you commit to it. You join in on the discussion with a full heart and receive praise every time you push the incel agenda, and you are brutally ridiculed and drowned out if you dare question it. You are now in an echo chamber where the only voice that gets ever stronger is the one that supports incel theories. Minor inconveniences become the greatest crimes that define all women. Irrelevant, fake and or misunderstood statistics become the definitive proof of how society is corrupt. And here, whoever says the most outrageous things gets the most praise. So everyone says ever more controversial, violent and disgusting things just to one each other up. Talks of desperate self-hate, suicide, rape, pedophilia, violence, murder and terror attacks become the norm, and all who commit them heroes. Manifestos of terrorists like Elliot Rodger get circled around, their actions praised, and wishes are made for them to happen again. This is both a general community activity that they pursue, and as many of them see it, a rebellion of the outcasts who are the only people in possession of the truth who rise up and challenge the status quo. Their entire community is about hating of the self and hating others. However, with this hate comes validation and acceptance as a member. You now belong somewhere. Obviously, this behavior gets attention. People around them are horrified and disgusted. Sadly, this plays exactly into the incel siege mentality. They view themselves as outcasts and rejects by default, so they expect others to react to them like that. They believe that all the normies live in a lie and will never understand them anyway. In their self-reinforcing bubble, they also know the truth, and if someone even suggests that maybe the other side is not the very definition of evil, they get shot down immediately. And not everything they say is grounded in complete fantasy. For example, in the United States, 51% of men between the ages of 18 and 29 were single in 2020, a number that since rose even further. This means that there is in fact a large demography of young men who are in fact not in a culturally traditional committed relationship, and it doesn't take that much of a stretch in imagination to think that many of them probably want to be, but for one reason or another can't. A huge problem with this is that if they are to reject the beliefs of Inceldom, they will have nothing. They are back in a world which they didn't understand to begin with, and now their online friends hates and rejects them. If they want to break out, they are pulled back, and if they do leave, the small social life they had disappears. This way, the community aspect itself plays a huge role in keeping incels in, which must be taken into account. It is not just about defeating the hateful elements of Inceldom or debunking its ideological talking points, but to tackle it as a community. Inceldom in this aspect bears resemblance to a cult, a doomer religion of hating women and society, and as with all cults, leaving it is very difficult if all you know are the other members. In conclusion, as I have stated at the start of this video, there is an epidemic of mental issues, and Inceldom is its symptom that emerged as an ever larger issue that must not be ignored. Inceldom, as we have discussed, is just one form in which this manifests. There are others too. I think we do have to put an effort effort and resources on a national level to combat this challenge through education and healthcare reform and through dismantling toxic cultural aspects that place unreasonable expectation on us and shame empathy and diversity of thought. People need to understand that it's okay to feel, it's okay to fail, to not be the carbon copy of an ideal. It's okay to experiment, to seek out, to be curious, to talk with people about your problems, to cherish and value each other as individuals, to encourage uplifting each other and not keeping each other down, and that sex is not everything and it's not over for you, while the equality of others doesn't mean you're worth less or you are inferior now. Women are people just like you, complex, and it's okay to know and include them, and to see them as individuals, not as a blob or hive mind of faceless objects all wanting the same thing. This was the first part in the upcoming video series about incels. In the next installment, I plan on debunking concrete talking points and data, most importantly the nonsense about hypergamy and black pill. Until next time, we were Kane, and we all love you.